Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, 20 years of IT governance in cybersecurity, 20 years of change in the world of cybersecurity. IT Governance is the company that I set up originally 20 years ago. At that point, it was simply because I was publishing with Steve Watkins a book called IT Governance, A Manager's Guide to BS 7799, BS 7799, the forerunner to ISO 27001. And since then, IT governance has grown quite substantially as a business. We have now become part of a broader group. We set up GRC Group, GRC International Group in 2018 as a step towards an IPO on AIM. And the 20 years of experience really feeds through to customers now all over the world as we help them tackle cybersecurity and data protection issues, ranging from obviously ISO 27001 implementations, but all the way through penetration testing, training, cloud configuration, security, and pretty well anything to do with the people and process side of governance, risk management, and compliance around cybersecurity and data protection. I'm Alan Calder, I'm your host for today. Since that first book, which we published, it's now in its 7th edition. We're working on the 8th edition. ISO 27001 is being updated. There will be a new version published in approximately September, October this year, alongside ISO 27001 2022, which has already been published. But I've written a number of other books around cybersecurity and data protection, all of which, with the exception up till now of the IT governance book on ISO 27001, are published through the in-house publishing company, IT Governance Publishing, ITGP, and from this year, the 8th edition of the book on ISO 27001 will also be published through ITGP. So if you're interested in that, now's a good time to make contact, get yourself onto the waiting list for it. I'm going to talk today briefly about the contribution that we've made to the evolution of cybersecurity, less about us, more about what's happened in the changing world of cybersecurity, because in the last 20 years, it's changed quite radically. Cyber criminals and how we fought them back in the early 2000s, how that's changed, what COVID-19 and the shift to remote working has done, the impact on us all of supply chain disruption, of the war in Ukraine, and the demand for cybersecurity skills, how cybersecurity will evolve. So something of a retrospective, something of a forward look, and I hope overall interesting to everybody who is concerned about or involved in the world of cybersecurity and data protection. So, yes, we've been 20 years in business, but it's been 20 years in which what we've done has really continually evolved. The first few years were fairly slow, non-existent virtually, because it was just a company that existed alongside that first edition of ISO, of BS 7799, which became the Open University postgraduate textbook. It continues as that to this day. That's been a core part of the drive for its development and evolution. And every time we do a new edition, there is a huge amount of change, both in terms of the ecosystem, the world in which cybersecurity is being tackled, the range of compliance regulation, and of course, in the range of threats, the attack vectors, the ways in which people talk about and consider and think about cybersecurity. And for people, if they had looked 20 years ahead, probably wouldn't have identified quite how complex the world has become today. In late 1990s, we were the first people to successfully implement an information security management system in 1998, I think. It was compliant with BS 7799. We had both an unaccredited certification, and then when our certification body was becoming accredited, we were their first accredited certifications. The first accredited certificate which they issued was also the audit which enabled them to become accredited to certificate ISO 27001. So we've kind of been involved in the way ISO 27001 has developed ever since. Steve Watkins, my co-author, has been on the ISO 27001 user group, on the ISO group that's developed future standards ever since. So the interaction between the way in which standards have developed and the way our own services have developed have become and remain pretty close. We think we're probably the world's leading supplier of ISO 27001 services. We have a comprehensive one-stop shop in our IT governance businesses for ISO 27001, and that's grown beyond ISO 27001. So we've become essentially a cyber defense in depth group now, but at the heart of it is ISO 27001. And the reality is that since 20 odd years ago, 22 years ago when we first did this, 24 years ago when we first did this, the opportunity for organizations to be held to ransom, to be destroyed, to be attacked in and around data, personal data, critical data, has been transforming. It's kind of interesting to see that someone like ex-President Trump of the United States said recently that the best way to deal with ransomware was to return to using paper, and that was unquestionably the right solution. It's just a kind of indication of the extent to which many organizations, many older statesmen or older people don't understand the extent to which digitization has driven improvements in the efficiency, effectiveness of organizations, and therefore the need for us not only to keep on digitizing, but to keep on evolving how we deal with cybersecurity in order to reap the benefits of technology advances. Switch to hybrid working during the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has exposed increased risks. Cloud-based solutions provide multiple opportunities for organizations to have people working from around the world, to cut central office costs, to really enable people to develop work-life balance, but also has hugely increased the range of opportunities for attackers. The threat surface has expanded dramatically. It has become much, much more porous. So big strategic changes in that period. We've looked at how organizations have shifted in their approach. Even 10 years ago, cybersecurity wasn't really an idea. We still spoke about information security and the protection of data in all of its forms, on paper, in filing cabinets, in email and digitally was considered the whole approach. By now, very little data is really kept in filing cabinets. The pandemic has accelerated massively organizations' digital strategies. Suddenly, organizations that were looking at how they shifted to a digital office and thought it might take them 5 years, worked out how to do it in a couple of months. Cloud migration strategies, which might have taken 5 years, were achieved in a matter of months. And the use of paper has become, in many organizations, non-existent. There are still some firms, interestingly, who insist on wet signatures for documents, but there are very few of those left in our experience. So the reality is that when you look back, Microsoft, which went public in 1986, Cisco in 1990, the IBM compatible PC was not yet ubiquitous in the workplace. I can remember in 1990, working between home and a business I was involved in, we'd put the whole great big box and its big screen on the back seat, drive it home at the weekend. There was no real question of being connected to the internet in any meaningful way at that point, but you had a computer. If you needed to exchange information, you put it onto a floppy disk. You mailed the floppy disk or exchanged floppy disks. So cybercrime was really a minority pursuit. Stealing a floppy disk might have been a pretty advanced kind of thing to do. But by 97, 98, we were beginning to get into more serious security areas. The first IBM PC virus created in 1986 The first Windows virus appeared in 1992. Still fairly minor. Email was a fairly minor application in the mid to late 1990s. Organizations were still saying, you know, what do we do with email? How do we really use it? Should we use it in volume? Should we maybe just spend half an hour a day on it? And that's just 25 years ago. You know, the 25 years, we've had a couple of generations of people born and come into the workforce. But the dramatic change really then came about with the creation of the World Wide Web. The UK's Computer Misuse Act, not adequately used since 1990, I think only half a dozen genuine cases, but it was an attempt early on to criminalize unauthorized access to or modification of computer material. It was a recognition that with the shift to the internet, there would also be a shift of crime to the internet. And for a long time, cybercrime was considered to be something that was really only the preserve of geeks and people who were, you know, kind of social misfits, wouldn't much more interested in what they could do on their computers, and with the evolution of the web, how they might be able to break into high-profile targets. So the increase in technology, the rollout of what was Windows NT, new technology, in 96, 97, didn't coincide with an increase in knowledge. Organizations didn't really understand the extent to which they needed to make changes to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And in a sense, you know, while the organization I was leading was the first organization certificated with a management system that could protect CI and A in a structured way, driven by a board's risk assessment, driven by a board that could make choices about which risks to mitigate and how to mitigate them. The reality was that the take-up was slow. After us, there wasn't a rush. There were a few organizations. It was a slow process of organizations recognizing that ISO 9001, which had really been quite slow in the sort of mid to late 1980s, had become much more ubiquitous through the 1990s. ISO 27001 followed, but more slowly, the same time frame. Cyber Essentials began to emerge in just 5 or 6 years ago as a recognition that the reality of cyber crime meant that technical controls were important, that the UK government should drive an attempt to have a limited standard in place that would reduce the range of internet-borne threats. And the combination of Cyber Essentials for all organizations, still really in its infancy, and the growing understanding of ISO 27001 and the way in which that genuinely enabled boards to drive cyber security, gave the UK a leading edge in terms of cybersecurity services, management, risk management, compliance services around the world. And the interaction of those with data protection and EU and UK GDPR is, of course, a recognition of the extent to which personal data has become a huge target for cyber criminals, and the possibility of personal data being leaked has become a huge risk for organizations. And we've seen at the same time as technology has advanced and cybersecurity processes have advanced, a growing understanding from people that their personal data is valuable. And that's been driven in Europe by the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the realization that, for instance, the Stasi in East Germany had a huge amount of personal information which they collected and were holding, and a determination in places, particularly those that had been subject to fascist or centralist authoritarian governments, to free their citizens from that kind of level of surveillance and personal tracking. And that kind of approach to protecting personal data coming into the same arena as organizations trying to protect themselves from attack has led to an increasingly sophisticated approach to cyber protection and cyber defense. Of course, what we've seen in that same process is a huge development in cybercrime and in cyber warfare. So geopolitics, cyber warfare shapes the cyber landscape, as you would expect. In Estonia in 2007, really probably the first cyber war, when Estonia had the temerity to remove some Russian statues and to focus on how life could be separate from Russia. There was a whole series of Russian motivated and sourced attacks on Estonian infrastructure. There were, following that, attacks in Georgia and on other countries that were part of Russia's destabilization of those areas geographically that it was aiming to take over or was going to war with, even though not necessarily a shooting war. We see that same destabilization played out in the preliminary months to the invasion of Ukraine. We see the Russian attempts to destabilize election processes across America, Italy, UK, the involvement in the Brexit activity, an ongoing process of using the World Wide Web, the information revolution, to drive by other means the agenda of a government hostile to the way the democratic West works. That kind of approach has meant that both nation states and private organizations, public sector organizations, have had to keep evolving how they deal with attacks. So the recognition that high levels of internet traffic, the development of bots, spamming of servers, everything in Estonia came to a standstill. That was a real demonstration of the power of the internet focused on taking down a particular government. But the understanding inside cyberspace that organizations need to deal with that has led to the development, for instance, of the Network Information Security Directive in the EU, which was incorporated into UK law following Brexit. The Network Information Security Directive being revised, bringing requirements about much more substantial cybersecurity defenses and reporting mechanisms for the whole of the EU, the development of the requirements around infrastructure defense in the United States, the Cyber Essentials in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre, the evolution of government computer emergency response teams, CERTs. All of those are reflections of the way that nation states have responded to that first major attack on a democratic government in Estonia, and the way in which that's quite clearly been driving activity and the repercussions of that activity across the rest of the world. So Anonymous, which originally was a hacktivist group, is now one of its most widespread hacker teams, with a consistent track record coming in terms of interfering with current affairs, focusing on nation states and criminal activity and corporations with whose activities it disagrees. Very powerful and effective. But remember, cybercrime is a very lucrative place to be. It's so widespread. Serious organized crime has developed significant capability in those areas. It operates models very akin to what happens in the private sector. So you can have phishing as a service, you can have crime as a service, all of those designed to enable people to really get involved in deploying software developed by other people to attack and monetize those attacks. So Anonymous has got involved in trying to push information about the Russian invasion of Ukraine to Russian citizens. It managed to take control, for instance, of the Russian news service TASS, and several other state-owned media companies replaced the content with their own anti-war messages, managed to get away with that for a short while. But it's an example of how anonymous hackers operating officially way outside of the approval of nation states can bring cyber activity back against Russia and China, North Korea, Iran, But the panic that's related to cyber attacks from Russia has also meant a growing need for cyber insurance. And in the last few years, we've seen cyber insurance shift from being something most organizations can afford to something which has become very expensive. Cyber insurance premiums have gone up by anywhere between 25 and 125% over the last year. They'll go higher. The number of organizations offering cyber insurance has decreased because, not surprisingly, the number of organizations who thought that cyber insurance is a defense and have relied on it when attacked have discovered that actually it's not a defense, it just mitigates impact. You still suffer seriously, you still have to rebuild, you still therefore need to spend the money that you would have spent, and typically you spend more on rebuilding than your cyber insurance cover will give you. According to Marsh, the price of cover in the US gone up by 130% just in the fourth quarter of 2021. It's 92% up in the UK. So cyber insurance is up. That's a consequence of cybercrime and nation-state attacks being up. That's a consequence of organizations being inadequate around dealing with vulnerabilities in their internet-facing assets, and internet-facing assets includes both hardware and software, as well as human beings. Human beings are responsible for probably 92% of all successful cyber attacks. And turning really just to remote working, because that's one of the ways in which cyber attack threat surface has increased so radically. The results of COVID-19, which meant so many organizations had to send people home. There were different forms of furlough or financial support from different governments around the world, but many organizations, particularly white-collar organizations, were able to survive by operating completely remotely, staff-based working from home. But that meant that organizations relying on people either using their own devices or supporting corporate devices in remote environments. So the way in which IT teams had to provide support has had to evolve. The way in which the management of availability of devices and services has had to evolve. But also it's meant that the possibility of crime taking place in the home environment has increased. The number of people who can access a device that's logged onto a corporate network has increased. The range of software that might be deployed has increased. In other words, the attack surface is much wider, and organizations not only need to manage that, but they also need to manage their cloud migration. And the biggest part of cloud migration is correct security configurations. The reality is that cloud is no more secure than anywhere else. If you fail to configure the environment you're operating in the cloud, you're just as insecure as if you're operating on premise. And many organizations just don't have adequate skills in-house to manage their cloud configuration securely. So cloud-based software as a service solutions increasingly popular, ease of access, simplicity of deployment, remote workers can use them. Major events like the pandemic lead to significant innovation, and we're seeing that in the world. There is massive development in software as a service, and while the current financial crisis, financial tightening, let's say, has led to a number of private equity companies saying to their investments, guys, you need to find a way to profitability fast. Don't rely on your next fund round in order to support yourself. Nevertheless, there are an ongoing number of software as a service businesses being launched. We see that. We have 6 or 7 software as a service platforms inside the group, all profitable, but all of them are increasingly in demand because they provide ways for our clients with remote working arrangements to be able to deliver whatever it is they need to be able to their clients. So switch to remote working, the COVID-19 pandemic, the ongoing disruption to supply chains, cloud migration, digitization, all of those driving incredibly rapid changes in the cybersecurity environment and in the pressure on organization to work out how to survive. And working out how to survive really now does come down increasingly to cybersecurity skills. And folks, of course, for those of you, just an interjection, who've been thinking, how do I ask a question through this? There is a Q&A function up there on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have a question, please do type it into that when we come to the end of the webinar. And it's going to be about 30 to 35 minutes in total. I'll pick up any questions there are and I'll answer them. I'll share the question and answer the question to the best of my ability. So, biggest challenge is skills. 25 years ago, the fact that you knew enough to set up and operate an IT network meant that you knew enough generally to deal with what cyber threats there were. Not so much these days. The setting up a network and managing it has become extremely complex. The challenge even just of managing a single sign-on across multiple applications, managing vulnerability updates and patching across multiple applications, managing remote users. All of those are huge challenges on help desk teams. And at the same time, cybersecurity, as I said, cloud configuration challenges, digitization bring a massive shift in the range of cybersecurity challenges. And there simply are not enough people to help organizations do that. Cybersecurity vacancies are likely to be up to 3.5 million by 2025. That's a 350% increase over an 8-year period. And if you think about it, however fast people retrain, and we run a massive training program, as do other organizations, so that people can gain ISO 27001 cybersecurity skills, data protection, privacy skills, the whole range of professional skills that enable people to deal with the challenges in their workspace. The reality is that there are not enough people who did computer science and did math and did hard subjects at school to fill the existing. So we need a big shift to take place in schooling environments. We need many more people going into hard subjects, coming through into higher education, doing hard subjects, physics, maths, science, chemistry, continuing to do computer science, preferably at university, coming into the workforce, able to take on ethical hacking roles, moving into the more complex range of cybersecurity. We kind of need that to happen. In the meantime, organizations, you have to outsource an awful lot of your support. You need to come to companies like us. You need to buy packages like cyber safeguard, cybersecurity as a service. You need to get data protection officer as a service, all of the kind of things that give you access to a skills bank that's continually being enhanced, that's up to date with the changing environment, because if you have a data protection officer or a cybersecurity manager, they've got to stay abreast of what's changing. You can't just simply deal with the way things were a year ago because things change so fast. So you're stuck with having to hire in skills, having to keep on training and redevelop. And then that gets worse because of machine learning, because of artificial intelligence. So you see the evolution of organizations like Darktrace, which deploys artificial intelligence to find attacks inside the network, try and control them before they spread. It's a useful deployment. It's expensive for most organizations, enterprise-focused offering, but nevertheless, we'll see more artificial intelligence deployed in technical solutions. We'll see more organizations doing basic technical controls like cyber essentials. The recognition that you have to lock down the technical risk will become much more commonplace for organizations. The focus will be on dealing with the human weaknesses. 92% of breaches involve human beings, whether that's an error they've made in putting what should be a blind carbon copy, a BCC list, into the CC list, or if it's releasing data by mistake, or if it's somebody clicking on a link they shouldn't click on and letting a virus or ransomware loose on the network. The human being is where we get biggest challenges. And we'll see enterprise technologies, things that are being developed, unified threat management, endpoint detection and response systems, all of those kinds of systems being developed and deployed into enterprises, there will be versions of them that will become available and will trickle down to medium and smaller organizations. But they're never going to replace the need for small and medium businesses to have some basic skills. So the training of staff from board through all of the areas to understand the requirements of the Data Protection Act, the requirements of cybersecurity and how to spot a breach, how to report a breach, how to respond to a breach, all of those will become more and more fundamental to how organizations deal with the ongoing reality of cybersecurity skills shortages. And this is before quantum computing gets going. Quantum computing has the possibility of completely outmoding everything that we currently do around cybersecurity. It operates in a completely different scale and pace. Most of the defenses we have will suddenly become inadequate, and it's going to be human beings who spot that and are able to respond to it faster. So building a cyber defense in depth, which evolves with evolving threats, is we see as being increasingly fundamental to how organizations are going to cope. You can't rely on a single level of defense because you'll be breached. Your first layer of defense has got to be dealing with vulnerabilities, patching vulnerabilities, so continual vulnerability scanning. And you know, the CISA in the US added 75 vulnerabilities last week to the list of vulnerabilities which its federal executive agencies needed to be patching because they were targets of cyber criminals. You've got to be continually scanning for vulnerabilities as they are discovered in the software and hardware that you're deploying. You've got to be able to patch those and deal with them. You need to continually update your staff's knowledge of what phishing emails and business email compromise attacks look like. What they looked like 6 months ago is no real use in understanding how they look tomorrow. You've got to have people completely up to date. Remember, an attacker only has to be successful once. You've got to be successful 100% of the time in order to deal with phishing and business email compromise attacks. Multi-factor authentication, we've seen increasingly across the financial sector a shift to one-time passwords being sent out to mobile devices, some varying forms of multi-factor authentication, preventing credential abuses becoming much more common and standard for organizations. So first line of defense, going to be breached. Very important to get it right, but you're going to be breached. So you need a second line of defense, which is making sure that you test your software applications. You work out how to exploit vulnerabilities. No good just patching them. You need to make sure that vulnerabilities are patched in a way that they're not capable of being exploited. You need a proper incident reporting process, tried and tested. A certification program like Cyber Essentials will make sure that you can, on an annual basis, certify to clients and customers that you've bolted down the 5 basic security breach areas that are exploited by the majority of standard internet-borne attacks. You need IT support trained on cybersecurity, and you need GDPR staff awareness training. Those are the kind of key things that enable you to deal with what gets through your first line of defense. Third line of defense really is management taking much more ownership of identifying risks, determining what kind of mitigation to put in place, you know, the kind of ISO 27001 management system, risk-based security controls that link to all of the compliance that is applicable, the regulations that are applicable in the jurisdictions within which you trade, so that as a board you can see on a monthly or quarterly basis a dashboard that tells you how you're doing in terms of managing current threats and dealing with today's compliance requirements. That's going to go wrong. So you need a fourth line of defense, which is how do you recover? And that's about building your incident response process into a business continuity management framework, which is integrated with everything else, disaster recovery, IT disaster recovery capability, looking at supply chain security management, making sure that attackers can't get in through your supply chain. And once you've done all of that, it's worthwhile thinking about how well your fifth line of defense works, which is about cybersecurity insurance. And cybersecurity insurance only mitigates impact. It does not do away with the fact that if you're attacked, you have a major disruption to your business, you have credibility lost, you have directors potentially losing their jobs, you have shareholder shareholder price issues, you've really got to build defense in depth. So for us, I think the lesson of the last 20 years, the evolution of the last 20 years, is that we've moved on from doing one thing or doing two things that might enable you as an organization to defend against attack, to the point where you need to do everything. You need genuine cyber defense in depth. It needs to integrate the legal aspects of dealing with a breach. It needs to recognize the role of business continuity and cyber insurance. It's very much, in a sense, what the EU's Network Information Security Directive looked for in 2018 when it first came out, and which at an even greater level is part of the revision that we see now, still incorporated in the UK, still reflected in the growing legislation in the US. But cybersecurity defense in depth, genuine capability to understand the attacks that are coming for you, build proper defenses, including tabletop rehearsals of how you deal with an incident, building that into your business continuity response, being genuinely resilient. And I think the next 5 years will see more and more conversation about cyber resilience than just simply cyber security. And cyber resilience is another way of talking about cyber defense in depth. Of course, as a group, and as IT governance, we can help organizations do all of that. And when we send out the slides, which we will do following this with a recording, you can click through from these links to our website. You can find out about vulnerability scanning services, about the Phishing Awareness Program, which is designed to, on a quarterly basis, update people on the latest form of phishing attack. It's got a monthly newsletter email which goes out, which tells people what's changed in the period. So it's a phishing awareness program. It's not just simply a once a year, you've done the course, tick, don't have to worry about it, because phishing awareness is not about compliance. Phishing awareness is about first line of defense. In the same way as vulnerability scanning should be taking place on a weekly and monthly basis, phishing awareness training should be taking place equally on a monthly basis. Cybersecurity incident response, data breach reporting, cybersecurity as a service, all of those are key components of building defense in depth. If you're reporting a data breach, for instance, you've not only got to deal with it internally, but if personal data is exposed, you may have to, in the UK, report it to the Information Commissioner. If you've got data that affects EU residents, you may have to report it in the EU as well. Incident reporting and data breach reporting process is integrated into our GRCI law service so that we can make sure that our clients are able to report breaches as they need to, not over-report, but report in a way that's completely compliant. Our whole cyber incident response process, therefore, integrated with the way we deal with data breaches, integrated into our cybersecurity as a service, enables you to, in effect, buy cyber defense in depth as a package. You can find out much more about our various services on our websites in the UK, and then sister companies in the EU and the US, all IT governance branded, all of the product range. Everything is obviously available on the UK site, and then in the EU and the US are versions of products which are more suited to those particular regional markets. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of the kind of reflection on what we've seen change over the last 20 years, the challenging environment that we think we are in today in terms of cybersecurity, and the even more challenging environment that we think we will be in over the years to come. We hope that you will continue to be users of our website. We will continue publishing, we hope, what we hope is useful information. You'll join these webinars, you'll buy and use our services where they're appropriate for you, and that we can continue helping you stay secure and compliant in this challenging environment. So if you do have questions, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, please do feel free at this point to put it into the Q&A box. If you have a question, then I'll answer it. If you don't, that's also fine. And we will therefore be circulating. Yes, indeed, we'll be circulating the slides after the webinar. So everybody who's registered the webinar will get a copy of the slides. Many people talk about data governance instead of information and technology governance. How does anyone differentiate? It's a good question. People talk about cybersecurity and information security, information and technology governance, data governance. You can differentiate. You can say data governance is about the framework and standards that we have in place for dealing with how data on its own is managed across organizations. But it's kind of difficult, in my view, to do that without thinking about how you deal with software and hardware within which data is governed. I think it's kind of difficult to do that without thinking about cybersecurity. For me, one simply has to think about a governance framework which looks at the assets that an organization has, and assets are hardware, software, and data, and thinks about how to ensure the ongoing confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those assets, how to protect the value of those assets, ensure that they're able to be deployed in a way that meets current and ongoing compliance requirements, but to the advantage and benefit of the shareholders and owners and stakeholders in the business. So I think that while the very narrow definitions, in other words, are interesting to the people who are interested in that very narrow part of the whole that I think of as being cybersecurity and data protection, or if you like, governance of IT, the reality is that it all actually goes together. Does IT governance as an organization provide training to those who want to get into a cybersecurity role? Yes, we do. We have a very substantial training program. We first launched our training program probably about 12 years ago. It came about as a result of people reading that first book, which we published, and saying, can you train us on how to do this stuff? We created an ISO 27001 lead implementer and lead auditor training course, which is still the leading qualifications in those fields. They are internationally recognized in what's known as an ISO 17024 accredited certification body. But the portfolio has expanded dramatically. There are cybersecurity foundation training course and cybersecurity practitioner training course, which are designed for people, the foundation course in particular, who are coming into cybersecurity from a management systems or an IT background. The practitioner course, the foundation course, is a prerequisite for the practitioner course. It's designed to help people move on in terms of their cybersecurity understanding. But we also offer training from other accreditation bodies. So there's a very substantial range of training. If you go onto the IT governance website, itgovernance.co.uk, across the top of the website, you'll see a major navigation menu. If you select training, there'll be a big mega menu that will drop down. You can select any subject area for training on there, and that'll take you through on our web shop to the range of training that you want. There are training pathways that can show you how to get from a minor qualification into a major qualification. You can transact on the website. There's huge amounts of information there that enable you to determine how you want to pursue a qualification. And we see a big part of our mission over the course of the next 3 to 5 years is helping people around the world get into and develop their careers in cybersecurity and data protection. Given the huge shortage of people for the roles that there are and the critical contribution people have got to make, we will be looking at how we can evolve the roles and the training pathways we offer to help people continually improve their knowledge and their ability to progress their careers in those spaces. This was meant to be only about a 45-minute session, ladies and gentlemen. We're at 44 minutes, so there's an addendum question just come in. Let me answer that. Are the training certifications provided by IT governance accredited by UK government cybersecurity roles? At the moment, there are no UK government accredited cybersecurity roles other than for some limited range of professional services. While we employ people who have those qualifications, we don't offer training. There are no training courses available that meet you to do that. Our courses, though, are accredited by the International Board for IT Governance Qualifications, which is an internationally recognized and internationally accredited personnel certification body. So it's recognized, the qualifications are recognized by a wide range of organizations as a result of that international accreditation. You can go and look up IBITGQ. It's an independent organization. You'll see it on the web. It's ibitgq.org, and you can read about it. Do you see cybersecurity in future as not having return on investment, as those who need it can't afford it? I'm not sure I properly understand the question. Are you talking about those who, cybersecurity insurance? Yeah, I think the reality is that the cost of cyber insurance is going to get so expensive that many organizations will decide they can't afford it. The other thing that I think will happen is that more and more insurance bodies will say you can have insurance, but it has to go alongside cybersecurity protection. So our cyber safeguard offering, the cybersecurity as a service, cyber safeguard, which you can click through to on our website, is a package of services. It's like defense in depth in a box. We've put it together with Hamilton Insurance. They're a major cybersecurity insurance organization, and they will provide, and it's embedded in the product, up to £500,000 worth of cyber insurance for organizations who meet the qualification criteria. And the qualification criteria are that you apply the minimum cybersecurity standards in the NCSC's guidance, that you deploy either Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. You've got the current certificate for those, and that you deploy the staff awareness training around cybersecurity, phishing, GDPR, and so on, depending on the level of protection that you want. If you do those things, which reduce the likelihood of you being breached, then you get cyber insurance thrown in. You don't pay any extra for the cyber insurance. It's embedded in the product. And if you have a claim, you'll be able to claim in a very joined up way from within that. So, and I think you'll see more and more insurers going down exactly that kind of a route, because it reduces the potential risk for insurers. It gives them much better control over their exposure, but it also means that organizations who have a breach are organizations who genuinely are able to respond and recover from it quite quickly, because they've got defense in depth, and that defense in depth includes a recognition of how to deal with a breach when it happens and to recover from it quickly. So I think that we will see more and more organizations simply going down, taking out Cyber Safeguard, adding it onto an existing Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus certification, because it's kind of a no-brainer. It's the stuff you need to do in order to be secure, and the fact that you get up to £500,000 worth of high-quality Hamilton cyber insurance thrown in with no extra cost is a huge, huge benefit to those packages. So that definitely takes us over the 45 minutes, folks. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I hope it's been a useful session. I hope the information I've shared with you is useful. Please do feel free to go on our website, give us a shout if we can give you any further information, but above all, do take appropriate steps to stay secure and compliant in the increasingly complex world into which we are heading. Thank you all for your time this morning. Bye-bye.